Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Geoff Finn, CEO of RealNex, and we are delighted to have you with us. And what a program we have for you, and what a great turnout. It's really great to see so many old friends and clients in the audience, as well as to see many, many new faces as well. So welcome to those of you who are new to RealNex and to our RealNex Webinar Series. And thanks for coming back to all the rest of you, some very familiar faces who've been regulars on this series. So really pleased to have you with us today for what is going to be a great session. I had a pleasure of a sneak preview the other day, and I think you guys are in for a real treat with Geoff Kasselman, our special guest, to talk about the exponential future of real estate. And it's going to be a whirlwind tour of the key drivers impacting our world, the ramifications for real estate, and what owners, service providers, and technology companies should be thinking about to not only stay relevant, but to lead in the transformation that's about to ensue with all of these dramatic changes that are upon us. So fasten your seatbelts and get ready to take it all in. And don't worry if you miss something, we're recording the session and we'll have it out to you by Monday at the latest with a blog post that will come out. So it's going to be a lot to take in, and I know some of you are going to say, what did I just miss? Well, don't worry, you'll get to replay it at your leisure and then be able to share it with some colleagues and friends if you'd like. Along the way, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the question box, and time permitting, at the end of the session, we'll do our best to address as many of them as we can. So a lot of people are still joining the group, and as they are, we're just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce you all to RealNex if you're not familiar. So we have a quick video, and we'll play that while everyone's getting settled in, and then we will turn the controls and I will introduce you to our special guest, Geoffrey Kasselman. So hold on, here we go.
Business as usual isn't good enough anymore. The future belongs to the technology-advantaged PowerBroker. PowerBrokers get more deals done faster with RealNex, the most complete commercial real estate technology solution for fast lead generation, complete financial analysis, beautiful presentations, stimulating marketing, and successful deal management. With RealNex, PowerBrokers quickly profile people and properties to most efficiently prospect for new business, manage deals, and report on activity. No one knows the market better than a RealNex PowerBroker. They have complete data on market inventory, comparable sales and leases, hidden spaces, and the most active buyers, sellers, and tenants. They efficiently collaborate with clients using the RealNex Tourbook leasing app and run accelerated sales processes in private and secure deal rooms. PowerBrokers eliminate redundancies and save time with automated investment and comparative lease analyses, and they swiftly create an incredible array of professional, elegant, and consistently branded marketing materials. When it's time to go to market, a RealNex PowerBroker can economically run highly targeted e-marketing campaigns to their private prospect lists, or instantly tap into the vast RealNex community to assure no stone is left unturned. PowerBrokers can even leverage 3D virtual reality to improve deal cycle times for buildings and spaces, and instantly assure clients the space works perfectly for them. PowerBrokers effortlessly impress their clients to instantly save more time and make more money. The future is now. You too can be a PowerBroker. Boost your results. Sign up for RealNex today.
All right, everyone should be settled in, ready to get rolling. We've added actually a number of new features to RealNex since that little video was created, particularly in light of the environment that we're in. So if any of you are in need of a very efficient and powerful lease management tool or comparative lease analysis tool, we've just upgraded our system to deal with all the new accounting regulations and to help with the lease negotiations that are going in light of COVID-19 to help with bridging the gap that might exist in the market. So great new tool to help with comparative lease analysis and for valuation of leases. So with that, I appreciate everyone being here. And Geoff, we really appreciate your joining us. Many of you know Geoff either with his background as a global president of SIOR or as the head of the national industrial practice at Newmark, or in one of his other many hats. But his resume is too long to read. I think we've shared it with you, so you'll have it. But I want to highlight just a couple of things. Geoff is a fantastic industry ambassador. He's a leader, an innovator, a top producing broker. He's an entrepreneur. He's a technologist, visionary, an advisor, and a friend. So Geoff, we really appreciate you and the role you play in the industry and the support you've provided to RealNex. Geoff recently joined CRG Clayco as a partner and senior vice president of workplace strategy, and really has some fantastic insights to provide as far as how do you future-proof your business. So Geoff, without further ado, I am going to turn the control over to you, and you will be good to go. So you should see the handoff coming your way. Welcome, thank you, and let's get ready, everyone. Sit back, and again, questions in the box. We will field them at the end.
Excellent. Can everybody hear me okay? Or Geoff, can you confirm?
You are loud and clear. If I see any issues in the chat, I'll let you know.
Screen looks good?
You are crystal clear.
All right, then let's go. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see so many people have an interest in this information and these topics, because they're very important to me, but more importantly, they're important to the industry, wherever you fit into the ecosystem, into your personal and professional success in the coming years. So thank you for making the time to opt in, and thank you to RealNex for inviting me and for having me today as your guest speaker. I'm going to cover an extraordinary amount of ground quickly. So with that, well, hopefully I'm going to advance the slides. There you go. Here's what we're going to talk about. After some opening remarks, we're going to really dig in on the exponential change that's effectively upon us, why, where it's going, and what happens when it all converges and becomes our everyday. We'll talk about X factors, because of course there's a few of those, and then we'll really break down several asset classes. So stick around till the end, because that's the good stuff. And I do believe we'll have time for Q&A and even some discussion. If you have a perspective that you didn't hear today that you want to share, by all means. I like to learn as much as share. So let's get rolling. I had a great introduction, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. All I would tell you is that for several years now, I've played at the intersection of real estate and technology and innovation and energy and sustainability. And when I stumbled upon that intersection, it turned out to be a great way to create value for my clients and differentiate myself from a crowded field of very capable colleagues and competitors. And so having done that successfully now for so many years, I've sort of become, a futurist or a future proofer. I don't necessarily like the way that sounds, but that is it. I am helping CRG clients think through their occupancy timelines in buildings and how we can build them the best possible buildings to withstand changes, because they're not immune any more than any of us are to the changes that you're about to experience. And so in that sense, if I can ever help you with a conversation about future-proofing real estate, I invite you to call me or call CRG or Clayco. Moving on, a couple of advisory board positions, including RealNex. But I invite you to check these out in your own time. Solar Skyrise is in the solar space, and it's one I'm particularly excited about. IntelliGlass is dealing with making mid-size existing office buildings smart and capable of remote control and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I invite you to check out IntelliGlass. They've really gotten out of the gates quickly. And then Byri is also of interest. It's a blockchain-driven marketplace software that will help monetize data in the future. So check out those three when you get a chance. There's obviously some other ones here, but let's keep pushing forward. I like to use some quotes when I speak. So here's the first quote for consideration. We stand on the brink of a tech revolution that will fundamentally alter the way we live, work, and relate to each other in its scale, scope, and complexity. It will be unlike anything any of us have ever experienced. This was stated by the organization known as the World Economic Forum, one of the great think tanks, just about 1 year ago. And I think it really sets the pace nicely for what we'll talk about moving forward. There are three fundamental premises that underlie the rest of the presentation. The first is that digitization is systematically eliminating inefficiencies. What does that mean? Digitization is seeking to reinvent processes in industries that have a great deal of inefficiencies or lack of transparency or middlemen, or it's why you have Netflix and not Blockbuster. It's why you have Uber and Lyft more than you have taxis. It's why Airbnb can proliferate. Of course, that's a pre-COVID thing, but nonetheless, there are some really ripe, globally scalable industries that are going to be reinvented in the next few years through the forces of digitization. And I invite you to watch and participate with me. One is the supply chain, which is already being transformed, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And the other to watch is automobiles. One person, one car is a concept that really doesn't work. It's highly inefficient, but we're still, that one person, one car is in a car 1 hour, one seat out of 5, 1 hour per day in the morning and 1 hour per day in the evening. So 2 hours out of 24 hours. So if you look at it from the real estate perspective of occupancy rate, it's a hideous return. It's really bad. So watch those markets for disruption. Number two, human beings are linear, and we've evolved linearly. It's all we've ever known, but we're in exponential times. I will show you that graphically momentarily. But as a consequence of that, past results, using the linear success of the past to predict the exponential growth of the future is no longer going to work. Number three, unfortunately, nobody gets to sit this game out. You can play offense, get in early, maybe shape the discussion, help lead the charge. You can play defense and wait for best practices to emerge. Unfortunately, you cannot sit it out. Nobody's immune from this. Moving forward, I want to share that this is not just information or ideas that I've generated myself with the benefit of these four fairly famous people who you can see that I've met several times for Ray and for Peter. They're all talking the same way, and they really speak about the same concepts with a great deal of credential and confidence. And I want to share their visions with you. Each of these guys is worth a Google in your spare time. Ray's a famous predictor of the future. Dr. Kaku, the world's most prominent physicist alive today. James Whitaker led the teams at Microsoft that brought you the Explorer browser, and then over to Google where he did Chrome. And now he's a speaker and professor. And then Peter Diamandis, who almost single-handedly ushered in the privatized commercial space travel. And if you watched SpaceX launch its shuttle to the International Space Station a week or two ago, you can thank Peter Diamandis for that. So really interesting people here. And here's what they had to say. I think this is a great one to start with. Peter said the only constant is change, and the rate of change is increasing. I think we can all feel that. Dr. Kaku said, by 2100, our destiny is to become like the gods we once worshipped and fears. Our tools will not be magic wands and potions, but the science of computers, nanotech, AI, biotech, and most of all, quantum computers. He also, by the way, was absolutely adamant that the interface of the future will be a smart contact lens, and we'll all wear one, and that will control everything we do. So that's something to at least watch for. Next up is James Whitaker. I had the good fortune to spend a weekend in Jackson Hole with him last summer. He's a very blunt, if not crass, to the point, passionate kind of a guy. And we were talking about different technologies like robotics and automation and networks and sensors. And he said, stop. Mark my words. When it comes to disruptive technology, there's AI and there's nothing else. That's all there is. And if you're talking about all the other stuff, you're wasting your time. And he said it in such an adamant way that I really had to step back and think about it and maybe recalibrate a little bit. That is an actual direct quote to my face. Next up is Ray Kurzweil. And this one caught me off guard several years ago, but it's proven to be pretty spot on. We won't experience 100 years of progress in the next 100 years, like we always have. It will be more like 20,000 years of progress, which of course is exponential. And that's at today's rate. And if you listen to Peter Diamandis, we know that that rate is increasing. So this is kind of a low ball. This is a conservative estimate. It's outlandish when you think about it. And yet Ray has a remarkable 86% accuracy rate with his history of predictions. And it's hard to wager against him. So now we're going to do a little time travel and really break it down. For those of you that are my age, around my age, or a little bit older, you'll recognize Sherman and Mr. Peabody and their Wayback Machine. And we'll use the Wayback Machine to do a little bit of travel. First, back in time. Let's go back 100, 120 years to the turn of the previous century. Turns out technology was a fascination back then too. From the cars of the future to the train of the future to cars that could fly through the air. If you look in the lower right, lower left rather, you'll see an article from 1953, Tacoma News. There will be no escape from in the future from telephones. Boy, how right they were, right? And then in the top center, this is a German postcard from 1900 predicting the future 100 years from then, the year 2000. Turns out, while the pictures aren't perfect, the concepts are fairly accurate. So it's really interesting to see where we were and the self-fulfilling prophecies that have followed. Most of us think the selfie is a fairly new phenomenon, last 10 or 15 years. Turns out that 1938, this gentleman looked into the mirror with a camera and took one. And to further surprise you, perhaps, that's a very young Frank Sinatra. He is often considered to be the founder of the first selfie. I thought that was real interesting, and I wanted to share that with you. Moving forward now to 1956, this is the first 5 megabyte hard drive, and to give you a little bit of perspective, over on the right, you can see what an 8 terabyte flash drive looks like today, all through the forces of exponential technology and Moore's Law, which we will jump into now. Most of you know a little bit about Moore's Law. In 1965, Gordon Moore theorized that computing power was now doubling every 18 to 24 months. With it, price performance, or another way to say it, the cost of technology was going down by half every 18 to 24 months. That has proven to be true ever since. That means we are now on the verge of 30 iterations. So to put linear, which is what we all know as human beings, versus exponential, which is new territory for us, if you take 30 linear steps, you go about 30 meters. However, if you go 30 exponential steps, you go 1 billion meters. And I didn't believe that when I first heard it. I did the math. Turns out it's actually spot on. If you take a standard sheet of paper and fold it 50 times, and fold and fold and fold and fold and fold again, just 50 times, you have enough to go from the Earth to the sun. That's exponential. Computing power, of course, has been exponential, up 138,000 times just since 1988. And if you have an iPhone or Android, if you have the latest and greatest iPhone or Android, the latest iPhone has an A13 bionic chip with 8.5 billion transistors in each phone, capable of over 1 trillion calculations per second. 1 trillion in the power of your hand. Unbelievable. That's Moore's Law at work. Here's what it looks like graphically. Note the deceptive part of the curve, which is early in the life of something that's exponential. Looks linear. Think of Kodak, who invented the digital camera. and thought it was on the linear curve, not the exponential curve. And where are they today? So that deceptive part of the curve is a really important thing. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. On the right, you can see where we are today. And that curve is shot skyward with just 1 or 2 turns. And most people will tell you there's 1 or 2 turns of Moore's law left before it peters out. Peter Diamandis talks about Moore's law and exponential curves with this diagram, the 6 Ds of disruption. First, something is digitized, and it's often in deception mode as it finds its footing. But as it begins to disrupt and gain traction, it demonetizes. As scale kicks in, it dematerializes, and ultimately, it gets to a point where it's democratized, and anyone who wants it, whatever it is, can afford it. And we've seen that happen over and over. A smartphone is a great example of that. So watch for the 6 Ds as we talk through the rest of the presentation, and I think you'll find it applies to most of the things that we're talking about. No surprise that the Internet of Things follows that same curve. We're well past the 50 billion connected devices at this point in time. It's interesting, exponential technology is the reason why all of these things had compressed time as it achieved a market of 50 million users. 68 years for airlines, 62 for autos, 50 years for the telephone, and 46 years for electricity, and yet only 19 days for Pokemon Go. That's the power of exponential technology. Ray Kurzweil talks about the law of accelerating returns. You can see here all the different paradigms since 1900. One gives way to another every so often. In the era of integrated circuits or Moore's law will peter out. 1 or 2 more turns and it will become subatomic and the physics of it break down. So the question is, what comes after Moore's law and when will that happen? Most people are telling us to expect quantum computing, which is a presentation unto itself, but suffice to say, quantum computing uses qubits, which are 1 zeros. So digitization is made up of 1s and 0s, and now 1 zeros, which by definition is exponential. Quantum computing connected to networked quantum computers are now capable of doing calculations that for most of history, mankind felt was unachievable. So anything you think couldn't be solved is suddenly within reach of being solved in a week, a month, a year, maybe 2 years or 3 years, but not much more than that. So it's a really important thing to track as Moore's law gives way. Final word on Moore's law, everything will be obsolete in 10 years. I'll be obsolete, you'll be obsolete. It's not my fault, I'm just the messenger. That's pretty much what Jerry Zucker had to say. So let's do a little bit more time travel, and this time we'll go forward just 5 years to 2025 or thereabouts. Hopefully most of you remember this. What's mainstream in 2025? Usually when I'm doing live presentations, it's fun to go through this with the audience, but in the interest of time, I'll just let you visualize what's on the screen and think about where these items are today and how easy it will be to think about them becoming mainstream 5 years from now. And if you're signing 10-year leases as a broker, as a landlord, as a lender, wherever you fit into the ecosystem of things, we're only talking halfway through that next lease, right? All of these things are now an everyday, all day phenomena. And most of them have some significant traction now. Don't take my word for it, just check the headlines. These are all real news stories from vetted sources, no fake news here. Don't have time to go through them all. I invite you to do a little bit of research, or if you want to copy the presentation, contact me or review what Geoff posts next week. But all these are accurate and underscores everything I just talked about. Here it is by the numbers. The numbers are staggering, and this was put out a few years ago. So as it turns out, these numbers are low. Give you a second to soak that in. Here's a nod to McKinsey, the company my son works for. I think he might be on the presentation today. So thanks for being a great kid, if you're there, to hear me give you a shout out. McKinsey says that by 2025, all of the things that you see here will be $1 trillion per year annual marketplaces. So you see mobile internet at the top, moving down the list, automation of knowledge work, Internet of Things, cloud, advanced robotics, all the things that we really just showed you in graphics a few screens ago. All of them trillion-dollar markets by 2025, which underscores the mainstream nature of where things will be. We talked about the ongoing disruption of the supply chain. So from the factory of the future, augmented by more and more robotics and more automation, through automated ports, and across what I call the mega mile, let's say to the United States, where it goes across the country and enters the final leg for delivery, which is really where most people call that the last mile. It's actually called the first mile. It's the first mile of the last mile, right? It's the first leg of the last part of the delivery. You can see the delivery man there, jumping on a scooter, bringing it to my condo in my high-rise condo in downtown Chicago and up to my apartment if the doorman lets him in, right? That's the supply chain, and it's historically filled with inefficiency and lack of transparency, and digitization is changing that rapidly. Things like COVID and spot shortages of materials are also further driving change within the supply chain. One of the ways to do that is by the use of blockchain. So this GIF shows you how something could be produced overseas, transported to the United States, and tracked with blockchain to facilitate its movement, not just accelerate it, but inspection accuracy, real-time tracking. It's decentralized trust and transparency all the way up to my favorite store here in Chicago, to give you some idea of how that might work. And now on to the last mile, where many of you have probably already seen one of these on the street or in the air. And I would even go on to predict that in the next 1 year or so, most of us who live in urban or suburban environments will experience this, because these companies, especially with COVID and a push for touchless everything, are aggressively moving into this last mile robotic touchless delivery space. So you can watch for this coming to a street near you very, very soon. Speaking of the factory of the future, I love this quote. It makes me laugh every time. The factory of the future will only have 2 employees, a person and a dog. The person will be there to feed the dog. The dog will be there to keep the person from touching the equipment. I think you get the idea. Let me back up here. Sorry for the aggressive trigger. On the top left now, as we move into robotics, you see the Kiva robots in an Amazon warehouse. Below that, you see my family and I checking in over Christmas at the Conrad Hilton in Las Vegas with the assistance of a robot. That's real. And now I'd like to show you a very brief video for anyone who thinks that robots don't have the dexterity to do the hardest, trickiest things in life. You may think otherwise after watching this video. I think you get the idea from there. And yes, that was a real egg, by the way. Let's give it a real estate context and talk about 3D printing as it disrupts our real estate ecosystem. What I'm about to show you is a 2,700 square foot office building in Dubai. It's the Real Ministry of Tourism. It was done a few years ago through 3D printing. It was built in 17 days, 17, for a grand total of $140,000. And if you're doing the math, that's just over $50 a square foot. And I'll show that to you now. So that's a real building. If anybody's been to Dubai and seen it, please drop me a note. Once in a while, I find somebody who's actually been there, and I always enjoy hearing about it. Dubai has gone on to say that by 2030, a short 10 years from now, at least 25 or 30% of their buildings will be 3D printed buildings, not just houses, all buildings. Next, I want to show you a very brief video showing the potential of drones. If you think drones cannot safely get you that bar of soap or that sundry item to your house safely, watch a little bit of this video and think again. This is just from New Year's Eve this year. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move us forward. I encourage you to find that video on YouTube and watch the whole thing. It's just a little bit longer, but I can assure you those are real drones coordinated to put on a show of shows. And if they can do that, then the potential of drones is much more immense than we probably thought it was. Bill Gates, in his own Moore's Law moment, said this about 20 years ago, and it's proven to be true ever since. We always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate what will occur in the next 10. And I think it's good to keep that in perspective as we talk about the next 5 to 10 years. And with that, we'll do a little bit more time travel this time to the end of that 10-year lease, 2030. What does the world look like 10 years from now? Well, your computer can do 10 quadrillion calculations per second, 10 to the 16th power, which is roughly the equivalent of a human brain, for about $1,000 adjusted for inflation. And you can afford that. Most people can afford that, and therefore will be carrying that on your person, in your phone, on your watch, on your ring, in your clothes, whatever the tech du jour is at that time. As a consequence of that, AI has become a thing. 24/7, it learns, it networks, it gets stronger. Think of it like this, or as James Whitaker likes to say, AI will never be dumber than it is right now. It only gets smarter, and it works 24/7. While we eat, we play, we sleep, we quarantine, AI works. And it's become a thing 10 years from now. Consequently, Internet of Things is given away to Internet of Everything. Autonomous vehicles are real and commercially viable, opening up a whole new era of transportation or mobility as a service that will make Uber and Lyft look like kindergarten for us. You now have on-demand and 3D printed everything. You've got gene editing capabilities, mashing up with biotech and nanotech, and I don't think anybody can accurately predict where that takes us, both good and bad. Blockchain is the underlying technology of all digital currency and digital transactions. So not only will the coin and paper bill currency go away in the next 10 years completely, except to your local museum or for collectors, but it will be touchless transactions as well. and rightfully so. And for me, if those things weren't big enough, I do believe we're headed to a globally based solar energy economy for the first time in recorded history, away from petroleum. And I'll break that down for you in a moment. Again, do not take my word for it. Click some of these links. News from recent headlines from vetted sources. The future of humanity's food supply is in the hands of AI. Google's AI proves better at detecting breast cancer than doctors. On and on we go. 80 million jobs at risk from automation, not from COVID, not from the economy, from automation. All under the watchful eye of artificial intelligence. So let's talk about that for a minute. Here's what Sundar, the CEO of Alphabet and Google, had to say. AI is one of the most important things that humanity has ever worked on. It's more profound than, gee, I don't know, electricity or fire. That puts it in a pretty lofty set of items in my book. Elon Musk went on to say, hey, I'm on the cutting edge of AI, and it scares the you know what out of me. It's capable of way more than you realize, and the rate of improvement is exponential. You can say what you want about Elon Musk, but that quote all by itself, with or without his follies, really has to make you stop and think. Where's AI going and who controls it? And if it's true, whoever controls AI may control the world. And that's why what's happening right now with the United States and China in the race to control AI is a real race. This transformative disruption period of time will give way to digital twins of people, of property, of cities, of machines, of everything, with the ability to diagnose and generate optimal solutions before physically making any change. Try to imagine a day when it would be malpractice for a doctor not to try a combination of medications on your digital twin before trying them on yourself. And if they fail to do it, it would be malpractice. That's really what we're headed for. And now take that and apply it to systems, buildings, things, entire cities. Autonomous trucking is a real thing. In fact, if you live anywhere not near I-70, 4 cities were just approved for autonomous truck tests from the Department of Transportation, who fully funded it. You'll see that coming to a highway near you very soon. Not just long haul, but tough maneuvers, stop signs, reverses, blind turns. As soon as they nail those things, you can expect this to go mainstream because it's got globally commercial scale and profiteering opportunity for so many companies, plus safety. Add in electric, it will be quiet, and everybody's going to want it. Not just trucks, construction vehicles, police equipment, buses, even airplanes and the largest ships on the sea. All electric, all autonomous, all in prototype mode already. Which brings us to the Hyperloop. This is a little bit of a longer video, so in the interest of time, I'm going to bypass it, but I really encourage you to look up how does Hyperloop work on the internet, and you'll get a 2-minute video here. Hyperloop has the ability to go across land at 670 miles an hour, which would enable you to live in San Francisco, have lunch in Los Angeles, and be back at your desk in San Francisco by 2 o'clock in the afternoon without reservation. You show up, you pulse down, you eat, you meet your client, you pulse back. Let me show you what a worldwide network might look like. This is one group's attempt to get a global map approved for Hyperloop connectivity. What this means is if your real estate development or your community isn't accessible to this grid, I don't know that you'll ever get the right number of people to make something commercially viable or scalable. This will change the way we transport, work, and live. It will open the door to clusters, super clusters competing with each other. So it won't be Chicago and Detroit competing. It will be Chicago and Detroit joining forces to compete with Inland West or the Great Plains or the Great Northeast, because you'll be able to move about freely, unrestricted, at a hyper low cost. Here's what happens if you take one person, one car off the road. So let me let you watch this GIF for a second. I'll let it run twice. So, right, 200 people, 177 cars, now without cars, now on bikes, now on buses, and now on one light rail car. Remarkable. Solar, here's the thing about solar energy in the sun. There's enough solar energy hitting the Earth in 1 hour of each day to satisfy global energy needs for a year. Until the sun explodes, which will not happen in our lifetime, I'm pretty confident, we are immersed in unlimited supply of solar energy. All we need to do is harness it. And with each passing day, month, and year, we're closer and closer to that. In fact, 80% of the world's population lives in the high intensity solar zone that you see to the right. And if you look closely here, yellow is solar, and the other colors are all other sources of energy. What this says is around 2030, those yellow bars begin to eclipse the combination of all the other colors. And in fact, what that means is solar becomes the dominant energy for forevermore. That's the turning point. And most of the gentlemen you saw earlier, the visionaries, all agree on this one point. The world is headed to a global solar economy at virtually no or low cost. These are all the countries or cities committed to that reality by banning petroleum-based or motorized vehicles. And not just these cities. If you saw the news earlier today, Lyft announced that their entire fleet would be EVs by 2030. So cities and companies on board here. The only weak link to the whole solar discussion today is that battery storage has been stubbornly linear, but there's about $500 billion of invested capital through private equity, through venture capital and other sources, R&D, focused solely on solving the battery storage issue. Once we can capture it and store it for use at a later time, the shift will be complete. And let's not overlook the demographics of the era. If you look closely, Gen Z will dominate by 2026 and on through 2030. That's where the spending power is. So find a way to make friends with Generation Z if you want them to spend money with you. Period, end of story. Okay, let's do our last bit of time travel to set that up. Ray Kurzweil, predictor of the future, said about the singularity, and he has a book on this called The Singularity. By the time we get to the 2040s, and he's very adamant about this, September or October of 2045 is the point of no return. We'll be able to multiply human intelligence a billionfold, a profound changer that's singular in nature. That's the singularity. Computers will get smaller and smaller. Ultimately, they'll go inside our bodies and brains, make us healthier, make us smarter. And everybody will be doing it, and you'll do it too. That's the concept. So a little bit of time travel. We're now in 2040. Hopefully you want to be alive or will be alive in 2040, because your reality then is convergence. Anything, anytime, anywhere. $1,000 now buys you a computer that's 1 billion times more intelligent than every human on the earth combined. I will pause and let you ponder that. As a consequence, everything is a service. Reality is indistinguishable from simulated reality or virtual reality. Abundance gets better, turbulence gets worse, and now you have unexpected, unpredictable consequences. You have perfect data, you have perfect markets. Scale matters, but nimbleness and parity matters as well. Profound implications. Geopolitical, borders changing, socioeconomic, universal basic income is a concept that you should get familiar with. How and where we live and go. Life expectancy, largely expected to soar past 100 years, all the way as high as 150 in the next 20 years. Stephen Hawking, who passed away a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, says we face an existential risk. He did the math, and he came out about a year before he passed away and said humanity has about 1,000 years left on Earth, and it was alarming, and it got a lot of press. And then 6 months later, he said, he held a press conference, and if you click this link, it'll take you there. And he said, I was wrong. One of the rare mistakes of my career. I was off by an entire iteration. It's not 1,000 years, it's 100 years. Humans have 100 years left on Earth. So when you think about Blue Origin and SpaceX and China and Russia and the US rushing into space, even Israel trying to land on the moon and colonize extra planetary reach, it makes you wonder when you connect all the dots. Here's just a real simple test. We can't do it in person, but I'll ask you to pick the image that's real out of the three. And if your answer is none of them are real, you would be right. These are all simulated reality pictures. And this is today. Think about how good a quality this will be by 2040. Some people think they'll have to have courses on truth because you won't be able to distinguish between virtual and real. So how will you know what's true and what's not true? Tough concept for me, maybe for you too. Vertical takeoff and landing will be a short haul concept because not everybody will take Hyperloop to go everywhere. This video shows, I'll show you just a snippet of it. Okay, so you get the idea there. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I am trying to be cognizant of the time. The point is that in theory, you could go short haul from the Marina District in San Francisco, for instance, to downtown San Jose in a fraction of the time. And once you hit scale in operations for about the same cost. And this is an Uber illustration. Now superimpose that on your geography and you get some sense of why this is a real thing. All right, I think I've probably pushed the limits on time travel, so welcome back. Let me get to the good stuff here so we can close it out. What are the X factors? What could change? Well, what we've all learned is force majeure is a real thing, isn't it? Whether the legal definition of pandemic is force majeure or not, things do happen. Climate change happens. Economies go in cycles. Global and local politics and politicians are terribly impactful. Legal insurance precedent has not been set to match the future yet, but we'll need to. Infrastructure access. If the internet goes out, where are we? If the cloud goes down, where are we? If the power grid goes down, where are we? We are becoming increasingly reliant there. What's the cost of capital? And can I borrow? Can I leverage? What are the data standards? Are they global or are they not global? Do I want to work with David or do I want to work with Goliath? And of course, we cannot overlook cybercrime. In fact, let me dig in on just a couple of these real quick. This is actually a real estate map. This shows the impact of climate change causing sea rise. Take a real good look at the East Coast and even San Diego and the West Coast, San Francisco. According to this, San Francisco's hills would become a cluster of islands and the Central Valley a giant bay. The Gulf of California was stretched north past the latitude of San Diego, not that there'd be a San Diego, right? And I'm just reading you off the slide. This is a real estate issue, and it's one that we have to take note of for no other reason than ROI considerations. Prince Charles recently at the World Economic Forum of this year said global warming, climate change, and the devastating loss of biodiversity are the greatest threats humanity has ever faced. Do we want to go down as history as having had a chance to do something about it and failed to have done so? He doesn't want to, I don't want to, and I hope you'll join me there. Climate change is a thing. Cybersecurity is a thing. We've all been touched by it. There's two kinds of folks when it comes to cybersecurity. Those who have been hacked and know it, and those who have been hacked and don't know it, but that's all there is. That's true of companies and it's true of individuals. I'm sure you've all had your own experience with more coming. Because why? The enemy knows the system. They're ahead of us. And no matter how hard we try to get ahead of them, it's been a losing battle for most of the time. Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, has a great quote that I wish to share with you as we move to close out the presentation and get into the real estate asset classes. You have to get to the future ahead of your customers and be ready to greet them when they arrive. And in effect, that's what you're doing here with me today. So what will real estate look like? I've got a couple slides that apply rather to all asset classes. These are concepts that go beyond industrial or office. Certainly, we're headed to space as a service and space on demand. We work on steroids, if you will, in all asset classes. DICE is something I've been talking about for a while. Differentiation, inspiration, community, and experience. And if an asset class doesn't have all of those, it originally was for retail, and it applies most readily to retail and entertainment, right? It needs to have all those things to be successful today as that asset class gets reinvented. But increasingly, it's starting to apply to office space, even to industrial space. So keep that DICE concept in mind as we go through. Brand loyalty is going to matter because when space is a service, you no longer are loyal to a building or a location. You're loyal to an opportunistic experience wherever you are at that moment in time. So to keep you coming back to a specific place, you're going to need all kinds of affinity programs and brand loyalty concepts to keep you coming back. I don't know if you know what customer lifetime value is, CLV, but we all have it. It's a number that companies use to track us and what we mean to that company over time. Are we going to spend a lot of money with them over time or not much money? Because that determines what kind of service or interaction we have with them. Buildings today have a walkability score. They have a LEED score. They have an Energy Star score. You can't go on with 20,000 different scores. What you're going to have is a mashup scoring that will be more like a customer lifetime value approach, taking into account hundreds, if not thousands of variables. And that's how we'll pick where we go. Automation and connectivity in the remote control of properties. Hypermobility and mobility as a service, more clustering as we've talked about. VTOL, do you know your air rights? If you don't, you need to learn them. C-Rise means more verticality and the ability to shift on the fly, right? More modularity, different building materials. Yes, I think we will have tokenized ownership through blockchain or similar technology where you could trade your ownership in a building as easily as you can trade a share of stock today. Urban planning is going to transform greatly. New codes, new ordinances, new taxes, new revenues. Imagine a lift tax on VTOL. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. Unprecedented partnerships. Just today, Shopify and Walmart made a big announcement in an effort to unseat Amazon as the king of e-commerce. Previously an unprecedented or unthinkable partnership. Amazon and Kohl's is another example. We're on internet time now, not atomic clock time. And there's not time to do everything organically. And that's going to give rise to more partnerships. We talked about digital twins. I do think where you have a congregation of people, right, where you have critical mass, you're going to have a need for urban farming. Certainly, you're going to have more net zero mandates and power on demand or microgrids. You're going to make the power where you consume it. New subtypes, automation of appraisals, lease comps, many of the things that we do manually now, leading to extreme monetization opportunities, 24/7 cash flow. And yes, for the brokers on the phone, I do think we're headed to an era of greater fee compression and new compensation models. And of course, where you go and why you go there, site selection is going to change dramatically with all these variables. So let's break it down. First, industrial. You're headed to an era of full automation supported by robotics and Internet of Things. It is going to de-emphasize labor, although you still will have employment. I'm not a big believer in employment displacement. I simply think retraining and redeployment of labor to higher value add, less redundant type work effort is in order. As you become more reliant on Internet of Things, you become more reliant on that infrastructure. And so having mission critical type infrastructure in your industrial buildings I expect will become the norm. Certainly a sensitivity to power generation and sustainability, more modularity, new materials, certainly adjustments for the arrival and departure of autonomous trucks and vehicles with less parking. You'll have on-site 3D printing, opens the question to, where do I go, rural or urban? I think fleet services becomes a subclass of industrial all to itself. And yes, there is a place for multi-story buildings, although it won't be everywhere. It will be in those urban cores where land is scarce. And you are likely to see industrial uses mixed with crazy other uses like high schools and soccer fields and public transportation and retail, all in the same building if it's multi-story. Moving on to office. I think you're going to see flexibility as the big winner here because we can work from anywhere with hyperconnectivity. So where will we go and why will we go there? I did seek some assistance of Angie Earlywine, who's a cutting edge architect here at Lamar Johnson Collaborative. So I want to thank Angie for her helping me thinking this through. We tend to agree on the things that you see here, more amenities, some of them, here this week and gone next week, pop up in nature. What you really are going to have are a network of studios, a showcase of culture, if you will. Dice will matter, more community spaces, avatars and holograms, side by side with humans, a lot of demonetized tools, and you better be able to move people to and from with VTOL and Hyperloop, or you're not going to have much of an office development. So yes, there will still be office space, but there's probably more transition in what and why than any of these other asset classes. What does retail and entertainment look like? Well, Dice is going to matter. It's got to be different. It's got to inspire you to go there. It's got to have a community that you feel good about participating in. And it's got to be an experience that keeps you coming back. That's Dice. And you've got to have all those things. So Dice-driven flexibility will define retail. The best example of that today is Amazon Go. But remember, that's the first half of the first inning. And if you haven't been to an Amazon Go store, please go. It's quite the experience. Certainly touchless transactions. Some are saying we might even pay with our data. If you're willing to give up data about you, that might be enough for you to consume an experience. In retail, the ability to return something, to buy 5 SKUs, keep 2, and return 3 is part of the retail experience. And so BOPIS and Boris are real things. Buy online, pick up in store, buy online, return in store. That's part of the experience. And that's why it's here with retail as opposed to supply chain. More on-demand retail or temporary pop-up retail, more 3D printing, recycled materials, perfect fits, especially as it comes to clothes and proteins, which is food. You will be 3D printing food at restaurants over this period of time. And it opens the door to clusters. When we go, are we going to go for a single destination or for a cluster of destinations? And how will they all survive? Will they revenue share with each other? I think there's going to be some new business models there. Multifamily, themed and scaled communities that make you want to be a part of it. It's an extension of that Dice concept. And because historically we don't like to stay put as people, I think there's going to be more formal global sister city programs where if you live here, you're welcome to go there and they are welcome to come here on some sort of predetermined pre-exchange basis. I think metro burbs are real. We want a city experience, but we want it in the suburbs. You're going to see safety and health as amenities, among others. Certainly needs to be transport centric like the others with hospitality elements. I think co-living and aging in place as baby boomers move through the demographic realm become a really important thing, as does telemed. And for me to want to live there, you're going to have to be able to account for that, because I don't want to have to move there and then move again. You're going to have to provide me some sort of food service. Maybe you grow it on site. And again, what kind of flexibility can you offer? Can you scale up? Can you scale down if there's a flood? Can you lift? And ultimately, I think we're going to continue, even though we're in a 6-foot halo era because of COVID. I think we'll resume a reduced space allocation per person concept, which we've been on for some years now as time goes by. Mixed use, a lot of the same stuff, but it starts with revised zoning allowances and considerations. I think you're going to see destination campuses with lifelong learning. So imagine a campus where you might have gone to college. You went there for 4 great years, and then you left, and maybe you go back once in a while. Imagine living there or going there frequently in a mixed use capacity, because they offer lifelong learning and you need new skills to compete in the world. And so when you get admitted to the university, you're admitted for life, not for 4 years. I think that's a concept that a lot of people are starting to kick around. Again, I think the scoring or ranking or rating system will be sort of CLV driven. DICE, here it is again, same elements as before, hospitality. Mixed use gives you the opportunity to have 3 different uses for 8 hours each and drive revenue for 24 hours versus driving revenue for 8 hours from 9 to 5. If you can do that and you can establish loyalty and repetition of visitation, there's a whole new revenue model there. And again, you need to be transport centric with telemed, food service, so on. Last but not least, mission critical data centers. I worked with Neil Sheehan of Sheehan Nagel Hartree on this. I call him the Michael Jordan of data center design. He's on the cutting edge and has been for some time. He's a good friend, and I appreciate his help on this. He said, Geoff, look, exponential demand. It's untamed and growing. So we think hyperscalers in nirvana. He goes, times it by 5 or 10. I said 1 million square feet. He said 5 million square feet, mega. He goes, and from there on to campuses. That's where we're headed, but only in the ability to work on the edge with edge computing, which again is probably a whole different presentation. But with 5G and new Wi-Fi standards and greater data throughput and data connectivity, we now have the ability to create and consume data in the place where it's created at the time it's created. And that opens the door to all kinds of new capabilities, but that includes data consumption and storage. And that's why you have insatiable demand. Certainly going to have modularity for temporary scale. He thinks fully robotic and automated, maybe even remote control with no people, right? Rare visits by human beings. Digital twins for preventative and diagnostic maintenance, and on-site power creation through microgrids are similar. He called it the ultimate merger of power and compute. In-rack fuel cell power, which reduces your need for AC, backed up with software and AI to reroute from one server to the next ahead of any trouble with purpose-built chipsets. Synchronized with edge computing via hyperconnection like we talked about. And here's the thing I think about. If all this is true, this is the one asset class where people can make really long-term commitments, which is going to make it the investment darling on a level that we haven't even seen yet. So I think the future for mission critical and also for industrial, very, very bright. The others are certainly ripe for a lot of change. So with that, let me just close out by saying it's about change management. The day will come when the risk to do nothing, to stay the same, will be more painful than the risk to change. And that day of reckoning is near, if not already upon us. Last word on the matter, it's not the strongest of the species that survive. It's not the most intelligent. We're all in this together. It's those that are most responsive to change that will prosper. And I hope that inspires you to pick one of these things, become an expert in just one area, go deep, become irreplaceable. And with that, I want to thank you all very kindly for your time and attention today. And I invite any questions or any follow-up as you see fit. Geoff?
Geoff, that's awesome. Thank you very much. I know you did your best to pack 90 minutes into an hour, and even with all the time travel, we just missed. So a little bit over the hour mark, and a fantastic journey. I think you may have intimidated the group because there are a few questions coming in. I think they're digesting, absorbing, and trying to figure out how to take this concept of the future and put it into their game plan of how they need to adapt and adjust and move forward. There was one question that came in, and was just to clarify VTOL, just to remind everyone of that acronym and what that was, and they can wrap their head around that.
Sure. Vertical takeoff and landing. The ability to softly or gently go straight up and straight down, as opposed to runway takeoffs and landings. So it can be done in small, compact spaces.
So, and a question about RealNex building AI into the platform. Absolutely, it is high on our focus, as well as looking at the implications of Bitcoin and the tokenization concept to create a more efficient transactional marketplace. So look for that in the future generations of the platform to come. Wow, now they're pouring in. Dice, if you could repeat that again for the group.
Sure, I would be happy to. I'll go slowly and give you a chance maybe to take some notes. Differentiation, inspiration, community, and experience. It has to be to engage us and to keep us coming back. It has to be different than the other guys, right? It has to inspire us to want to go there. Maybe bring somebody back with us, somebody from our family or our friends. It's got to be a community we feel comfortable being a part of. If we don't feel comfortable there, we're not going to go there, right? And it's got to be an experience. And each time we go, it's got to be a different experience. If it's a redundant experience, then you're going to check the box and say, been there, done that. And you're going to move on to the next experience. So it needs to have some element of all four of those attributes to be a successful retail or entertainment concept as we move into the future.
Geoff, this is not the exact question, but it plays on it. Other than building robots and developing AI, which not everyone is brilliant enough to do, what happens to employment? Where do all the people go?
I am not a gloom and doomer there, and I'm sorry if I inadvertently channeled that today. I think in the near term, right, quality of labor is the thing that's driving most of our real estate transactional activity. Although even with COVID, some of that may change, but it will give way to automation, into robotics, into Internet of Things, in large scale in many parts of the world. But what that will do to those workers, in conjunction with some retraining, whether it's coding or management training or sales training or on and on and on, it will allow an employer to redeploy those people in a higher value add capacity to the enterprise. So I really don't believe it's going to be a robots in, the person's out concept. Now, COVID's a whole different thing, right? That's an economic issue where the income by which I use the cash flow to pay you isn't there. I can't pay you and I feel terrible, but you're furloughed or you can't work here anymore. That's a whole different concept than robotics displacement or automation displacement. I really think it's a kick up the ladder, not a elimination of jobs. But there needs to be some retraining. Not all of us have all the skills we need for the future.
Right, and that's why that lifetime learning bit that you talked about is critical, and to broaden the access to that level of training for a lifetime. A couple of people are hanging in, so if everyone's good, we'll hang on for a few more questions, and I appreciate the interest and attention. And Geoff, you're going with us. There are significant demands and implications to what you presented that defy current reality of zoning and planning and the government side of it. So the architects can theorize and developers can conceptualize what they want to do, but how do you how do you see cities and towns enabling?
I'll give you, I'll give you an anecdote of a real scenario to demonstrate the point. There's a site in suburban Chicago where I won't name any municipalities, where the municipality has always said, I will never allow industrial development of that site, even though it would seem to be very logical. Okay, but it's simply not in their master plan, and they don't want trucks and noise, and it's not for them. They don't need it. They don't want it. Never happening there. Then e-commerce happened, and then COVID happened, and then unemployment happened, and then revenues tanked, and they went, you know what? That industrial sector, it's kind of hot. That's where the jobs are. That's where the revenue is. Maybe we should rethink that. And they're in the process of rewriting their zoning code to allow that site to go industrial. Think of the malls around the country that have already been torn down and become an Amazon distribution center. Urban cores, where the hard work is, do have their work cut out for them. And there is a digital divide of sorts where the decision makers and the politicians, and again, I'm not picking on anybody, and I'm not even picking on demographics, but there's an analog age or demographic who's always done it a certain way, and it's what they know, and it's where their confidence lies. And they're probably only a few years away from retirement, and they're not prone to risky innovation, but they're making decisions for that Gen Z set. And the Gen Z set views the urban core differently than the policymakers. And until that Gen Z wave moves through, where the digitally entitled rise up to become our decision makers and our politicians and our lawmakers, there will be friction there, but it will change over time. It absolutely has to change.
You recall the uproar that took place with the initial concepts for Amazon and the drones delivering whatever they were going to deliver to your doorstep, and the chaos that might ensue with that. You had a slide in your preview. You didn't show it today, but it goes to the VTOL with the George Jetson view of the world. I mean, that type of change is staggering to think about, to have the reality of transportation and the implications, to get that through an infrastructure approval process and a mandate to say that that's the new reality.
Geoff, in the COVID and post-COVID era, every city, every county, and every state's budget is suddenly terribly, terribly upside down. They are spending money they didn't have and collecting less than they were counting on, right? That's the reality. They really don't have much choice but to jump on the innovation bandwagon and rethink everything, because if they fail to do so, while some of their peers and colleagues in other locations do, and if those other colleagues or peers in other locations are successful and the action moves out of your city to their city, do you think they're going to get reelected? Do you think they're going to have a job? So I know it's tough sledding, and I don't expect this to be an overnight phenomenon, but you almost don't have a choice. It goes back to one of those fundamental premises. You can play offense, you can get ahead of it and be a leader in it. You can wait till a best practice emerges, and when it's safer, venture out then. But you can't do nothing. Nothing will turn you into a dinosaur faster than you can blink an eyelash. And that's true of cities and of budgets and of zoning codes and new tax revenues. How are we going to pay for it?
One final, and then we'll wrap it up. Do you see industrial being hoteled?
You know,
or we worked, however you want to conceptualize it.
I think you'll see a subclass of industrial that caters to that urban, temporary, quick scale fulfillment need. And in that sense, it's a soft yes. But when you're talking about industrial where things are being manufactured, until we can Star Trek it and dematerialize it into dust and rematerialize it in our living room, which we can't do and is not contemplated by this presentation, nor any current level of thinking. Industrial is a place where things will be made and things will be a place where value is added to things and then delivered. And consequently, the CapEx associated with whether it's automation and robotics or amenities for human beings or some combination, that's a tough place to hotel, unfortunately. So there will be some hoteling, but it will be limited to hyper last mile, urban core. 3 million people need to consume between Thanksgiving and Christmas, but not the rest.
Or seasonal type of thing.
Yeah. So it's like I said, I think it's a soft yes, but it's not a complete yes.
There is one more, since we have a large contingent in the audience here, and you may have scared some of them. Is there a future for brokerage, and how do you see it? And with that, we'll wrap up. So just this one final perspective.
I think about it all the time. I spent 31 years as a broker, and while I'm enjoying my new life on the development side, obviously I think of brokers in the most fond way, and had 31 amazing years as a broker. So my heart says yes, but like anything else, brokers have to adapt. They have new skills to learn, and they have to be willing to experiment with new revenue models, more value add. This blockchain marketplace that I'm working on, it's a way to monetize data without selling it. You can license it and maintain ownership of it and generate revenue off it almost infinitely. You can license it to anybody you want at any price you want for as long as you want. You make the rules, we'll facilitate the transaction and take a micropayment on it for facilitating it, right? And yet, the resistance by brokers to jump into that new way of doing it, even though there are players in the world as it pertains to data that makes the hair on the back of their neck bristle, they're still reluctant to change, right? So it really depends on change management, which is how
I think you've got to really lead the way in change to stay relevant. So I think that's the issue. You can't watch it happen and then you will be disintermediated.
Robots are not
part of that transformation.
Robots are not going to replace your relationships. If you have authentic relationships, lifelong relationships, that's worth more to you and your employer and your clients than you even realize. And for that reason, brokers will be one of the very last areas or vocations to be disrupted.
But consuming tremendous amounts of AI, data, intelligence, advice, and the ability to help in the negotiation. I think it's a new role, a different role, but a very important one. We'll wrap up now. One of the things that came up a few times again, will this be recorded? We have recorded. We will distribute this for you and for you to share the first of the week. And to the point, there was a couple of questions about some of the things that RealNex is also enabling. When you talk about the digital twin, we have this virtual reality platform that we create models of buildings or towns or spaces, and it can enable that concept for you to help in marketing or envisioning or looking at workflows in space to see if spaces work in a virtual world before you put it into a real world environment. So if you're wanting to learn more about that, let us know and look for more information as we continue to evolve the platform and respond to these types of macro dynamics that Geoff presented today. Geoff, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and insight and hopefully giving us a view of what's to come and helping us prepare for it before it happens, and enabling all of us to take better advantage of and get ahead of that curve. So thank you once again. Thank you everyone for joining us. We appreciate your participation, and any ideas for future sessions, let us know. And if you have questions, you can ping Geoff or me, and we'll try to respond to some of the questions that we weren't able to get to. So thank you all once again. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much. Bye now.